Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me this week as I turn this and this into this, an eccentric version of Poseidon's Trident.
Son of a friggin' dragon!
Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. Well, my intention this week had been to bring a new video to you working with and highlighting my friend Greg's, I'll call it a hobby, of full armored combat. That was my intention, and then this happened. About 10 miles south of me, the largest wildfire this season in Colorado erupted, and then a few miles south of it, another fire, and then another fire, and then another fire. So that changed a little bit of what I was planning to do. So while we sit wondering what's going to happen, we are right on the evacuation line for one of these fires. And you may not be able to tell, but the smoke is fairly thick here. That has changed the plans. So this week, I'm going to be making a eccentric version, my version of what you might call Poseidon or Neptune's Trident spear. I'm actually really looking forward to this because it's going to be equal parts artistic, expressive, and potentially, I would say historically accurate, but just accurate to the lore of who Poseidon or Neptune was as a mythological figure from thousands of years in the past. So without further ado, let's get to the shop and get started. I believe we've all seen those iconic images of the Greek and Roman god Poseidon and Neptune, his counterpart, carrying a three-headed spear, a three-toothed spear, which is literally what Trident means. It means three, and then the dent means tooth. And other than that classic imagery, this actually had a use. So the three-pronged spear was a fishing spear, and most of the times they would have these little barbs on either side of the spear points to capture and hold on to whatever fish. If you had a single pointed spear, your chance of striking the fish that you're spearing at was much less than if you had the three-headed spear. Sort of makes sense. It is very interesting, I think, that also the coat of arms for the country Ukraine has a trident on it, but also a island nation, Barbados. It's part of their flag. It's also part of several other heraldic flags and representations of other bygone countries and nations of the past. So I got this really cool piece of wood from a good friend of mine when I was helping them move. I've seen this laying around their house before, and I just decided that I needed to ask them for it, and they were nice enough to give it to me. And forgive the no shirt, as you can see that it was really, really hot in the shop this particular day. This particular week across most of the US, I think, has probably been sweltering. So this daddy body definitely goes shirtless from time to time. You'll just have to bear with me on that. And in trying to get this shaft down to something that was workable, I tried all sorts of different things. I tried a jigsaw, I tried a angle grinder with a saw blade, ended up using the bandsaw, as you'll see in the end. And then these are cutoffs from various projects that I've done, pieces of metal that I just looked at and thought, you know what, I might be using these or want to use these in the future. So I keep those things, and then here you do see that I am going to start laying into this piece of wood. I am really not good at making what are called sockets, which are the attachment sites for shovel heads, spear heads, hammer heads, that sort of thing. I just can't stand it, but I was going to make 3 of them, no less than making 1. Each time I've made them in the past, I've really messed them up. But before I do that, I wanted to make this piece of wood as organic looking in terms of maybe a piece of coral or something that was growing off of the sea bottom. So I needed to get it down to a very rough shape. And what's cool about this is that I really didn't need to refine it too much. It could be extremely rough because I was going to make some sort of spiral like you would see on a narwhal horn or a unicorn horn, hopefully to give it more of that coral type look. And here we have painter's tape. I have to be honest that my life is measurably worse each time I have to pick up and use painter's tape. It's just not something that I enjoy using at all, but it is the best thing to use for this sort of application because I will be cutting into it a little bit, as you see here. But it's a really nice way to make these sort of spirals. And again, the striated variated look to that wood is exactly what I'm going after. It sort of just works out that I don't have to put a lot of time and effort into refining it. And now onto the sockets. I'm only going to show you the first of the sockets that I was making because they're just essentially all the same. But like I have in several videos past where I've made spear sockets, I pretty much got these measurements wrong on all of them. Here's this really interesting hammerhead that I think I found somewhere, and it really works well to sort of taper down and refine the socket shape. Now it's just on to welding that closed, refining it, and then each of these spearheads, I wanted to get a rough layout of how I wanted them to look when they were all on the actual spear body together. To keep this shape between the two halves of each spearhead, I did intend to, and ended up using these little pieces of metal to embed between them. I don't think it deteriorated from the overall look, but I really like the way the main spearhead here turned out. And then this is the right spearhead, and then you'll see here in a second the left spearhead. Again, going for a very organic look, as if something off of the seabed had grown from the top of the spear body. Now I'm going to use the 16 penny nails, and they're going to be my rivets to put them on. But before I get those rivets in there, there's so much free open space, if you will, between each of these sockets and the spearhead itself. As you're going to see here, there's just so much open space. It's just my lack of ability. So I'm using this, it's basically Bondo, but I'm using that to sort of fill up that space. And then the junction between the spearheads and the body, it has a lot of gaps to be filled up there too. So painted it black, is actually stained it an ebony color. I'm going to go ahead and put those rivets in. I decided to film all three of these rivets. I was convinced that this was just going to shatter the wood underneath, because this wood was really brittle. You didn't see off camera, but I broke a section of the bottom piece about 6 inches off the bottom, shortening it by about that much. But I'm going to go ahead and hit this with this electronic file here, get the residual Bondo off, and then probably end up painting it, because I don't think it's going to accept a stain. But it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I didn't end up actually sharpening these very sharp at all. The points are pretty sharp, but overall I just didn't really find the need to make it a very sharp spear. It's probably just going to be a wall ornament anyways. And it just so happens that I am the loving father of a little mermaid, and she has a mermaid outfit that she's wanted to wear. And she relishes any chance she gets to wear this outfit, so I thought it would be rude if I didn't give her that chance and let her pose with the spear. But here she is, all said and done. Well, thank you for joining me for this build. I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. And currently we have a wildfire burning about a little over 10 miles to my south, and I just started feeling raindrops, so that's pretty cool. Thank you, Poseidon. Okay, I am happy with this. I do like the way this turned out by and large. There are some learnings that I had in making this, and straight into what those are. I should probably never allow myself or permit myself to build for someone else. Sockets, again. My impatience in life, my hurriedness when I do projects just does not seem to play well with trying to get sockets that actually fit and look the part. As you saw at the end there, none of these sockets fit anywhere within the realm to a close tolerance of what I measured it out to be. All three of these sockets shared their own peculiar set of flaws and discrepancies. You saw at the end there, I had to put a lot of basically Bondo to fill in these huge gaps between the wood and the socket. It does look the part, it looks fine, it turned out good. I am forevermore presenting myself from ever trying to make a socket again. Just kidding, I'm sure I'm gonna make tons of sockets in the future. I do very much like what I'll call the organic nature of the way this turned out. The intention was very much to have something that looked like it grew off of the sea bottom. And I'll tell you what, you know, even though it's wood, to emulate a piece of coral or a piece of coral coming off the reef, even in the blades, it did a pretty good job. And I didn't want each blade attachment to the socket to be the same. And so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. These are not remotely sharp. They're sharp on the points, very sharp on the points, but they're not remotely sharp, which is absolutely fine to me, because if you were to ever try to use this in any way, I think the whole thing would shatter and fall apart. But the last moral of the story, or learning that I had, which I want to share with you, is this. While I'm not advocating that people just keep every piece of metal or every piece of wood that they ever came across and have these huge piles of junk in their shop or outside their shop, with an artistic eye, do keep pieces of metal that you have cut off or that you've seen or that you come across that have some level of interest or practicality to them. As you saw, I really didn't have to cut or grind too much on these to get them to the shape that they're in. They were already in a kind of interesting shape. And that's just because I know when I'm looking at a piece of metal, once I'm done with it, doing something, would I want to hold on to this? Might I actually use this in a future application? Does it have an artistic or aesthetic element that I appreciate? You get the idea. And the final learning for me, which is another just piece of advice, is when you receive something that you're supposed to build with that is asymmetrical, that is not symmetric, as my friend Jeff would say, lean into it. Lean into that creative process. Make something that actually accentuates the asymmetric nature, or bring that asymmetry back into something that might have its own pleasing symmetry to it, even though it's not perfectly uniform. None of these have the same shape. None of these even have the same height off of the spear bottom. That's very intentional. That's it for me. Join me next week as I start a new project, which might be a bit of an undertaking, and that is I'm going to make my daughters a rock fort / tower. And the moment that I just said that to you, I got all sorts of images of a rock tower crumbling with my girls inside. So come join me for that process. I am not one for building structures, but this one's going to be really fun. And I think not just they, but their Uncle David, my brother, is going to be here to help us with that. If you like other projects, other ideas, other builds that are like this, that are avant-garde, whimsical, fantastical, check out my channel for other builds that I've done and other oddities that I've tried to master. Until next week, God bless. Thank you for joining me.